All right, here we go, everybody. Good morning. We love that. We don't heat you. We don't heat here either. There's no heat in my office. So there's no heat here, but you can hear us now even without the heat. Is that true? All right, good. We're so excited to be here with all of you. We hope that you'll be able to access the Safaria link that Anna just put in. Thank you, Anna, for being behind the scenes and with all of us. We're here to learn some Torah. It's exciting.
It is exciting.
Totally.
Based on a session we had yesterday morning. So we're excited to share that with you.
Maybe somebody can do the Birchat Torah.
Oh, what a good idea.
A great idea.
Are you asking for a volunteer? Is that what you're doing?
Sort of, but I think we just choose somebody.
All right, go ahead.
Let's see, who's in the room here? Neil, would you, Chaim Yosef, would you lead us in the Birchat Torah? It's going to be on the screen in front of you as soon as Anna puts it up. Is the sound going in and out for everybody, or is it just for Suzanne? Oh, in and out. Okay, interesting. Okay, we'll try our best.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Amen, amen. So the source sheet that we'd like to share with all of you, I'm going to bring it up right now. And there we go.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about why we're in Exodus 2 and the Parsha is Bishalach, right? We're starting in Exodus 2 because there are all kinds of questions that came up yesterday as we were studying about Miriam. Who is Miriam? Where does her name come from? What's her role? And we decided to go to the beginning in order to go forward.
So Vayelech ish mi beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi. Certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman, a bat Levi. Vatar isha vateled ben, and the woman became pregnant. The woman conceived, had a son. Vatere oto ki tofu, and she saw that he was good. The whole house filled with light, as the Midrash says. He was good, like the first day of creation, first light. And she hid him for 3 months. And she could no longer hide him. And so she took for him, a basket of gumi, and then on the inside and outside covered it in tar, insulating it and waterproofing it, and put the child there, and then placed him in the suf, in the reeds on the lip of the Nile. Vatetatsav achoto merachok.
So when and his sister stands at a distance, but when we're introduced to her, she's just the sister, right? She has no identity of her own. She doesn't have a name. She's totally in relationship to Moshe, right? For the sake of l'de'ah ma ye'aseh lo. So she stands there for the sake of knowledge of what will happen to him or what will be done to him. V'tered bat paro l'chot al hayor v'naroteha holchot al yad hayor. So the daughter of Pharaoh, emerges to bathe in the Nile, and her female servants are also walking by the bank of the Nile. V'terei es hateva b'toch hasuf v'tishlach et amatach v'tichacheha. So she sees the little worker basket in the reeds, and she sends one of her servants to fetch it. And they do. So she opens it and she sees a boy, and here there is a child crying. Vatachmol alav, and she has pity on the boy. Vatomer, miyaldei ha'evrim zeh, and she says, from the Hebrew children, this one must be. Vatomer achoto el bat paro. So the sister, or his sister, says to the daughter of Pharaoh, ha'elech v'karati lach isha meineked minha ivriot. Should I go call for you a nursing woman from the Hebrews? V'teinek lach et hayelet. V'teinik lach et hayelet, and she will nurse the child for you. V'tomer la bat paro lechi. And the daughter of Pharaoh said, go. V'telech ha'alma v'tikra et em, and the young woman goes to call the mother.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, where are we exactly?
The end of verse 8 is, and she went.
Okay, Hayal. I see,
Hayal.
to call the mother of the child. Thank you. V'tomer la bat paro helichi et hayelet hazeh v'hinikehu li va'ani eten et scharech. So the daughter of Pharaoh says to the mother, take this boy and nurse him and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages, which always astonishes me that a mother would end up getting paid for nursing her own child. And the woman, who is actually the mother of the boy, takes him and nurses him. Do you want to pick it up?
This is always happens when we learn together. When Rabbi Kolarski and I learn together, I feel like I can't go forward. Like all of a sudden I have 1,000 questions. The way that the slow reading that we do together, and even now as I'm looking back at these verses, it's just like so many things that are just incredible about the verses, about just the whole thing, and the it's remarkable, of course, that the pause between the moment where the Torah tells us that the daughter of Pharaoh has compassion for the child, and then the very next moment, that's when the sister inserts herself. Such a perfect insertion, like it's as if she didn't even allow there to be the possibility of what nefarious thing could be done with her brother. She knew exactly when to step in, when to speak, and how to say it, and it was just a remarkable moment.
Yeah, her timing is exquisite.
Exquisite timing.
She knows when to just stand there and knows when to
just insert
herself. Right, exactly.
And she doesn't say, she said, would you like me to? And what a fraught question, but what an amazing question. Giving like leaving the power, of course, where the power was, which was with the daughter of Pharaoh, but like bring your conscience, you have Rahmanas for this child, you have such compassion. She's like, I can help, right?
Right, she provides a solution.
She provides a solution to the problem.
And she decides the daughter of Pharaoh has, even though the daughter of Pharaoh doesn't know she has a problem.
Exactly. It's amazing. It's exactly what she does. She's brilliant. And she sees him from a distance. I know that one of the most beautiful things that I ever saw written was that of course, that Moshe is called a Na'ar Bocher. He was already from the beginning. He was someone who was involved with water. It wasn't even that he was like, he is identified as a child who emits water, right? He's crying. And then that she sees that he is crying, not that she hears that he's crying. And I remember once somebody said that in the name of, it doesn't matter, that to be able to see someone's tears, even when you can't hear them crying. Right? So it's very powerful that she has. Anyway, so here we are. But
she sees the crying that her father will not hear from the people of Israel. Right? She's able to do that for some reason.
And it's never more powerful than, it's always powerful. It's always powerful to hear that the Redeemer of our people was brought up in the house of the enemy, and his mother was the daughter of Pharaoh. It's just always astonishing in terms of Moshe's character. But here we're focusing on Miriam. So we're coming back to verse 10. Like the child is Gadol, which becomes a very important word in the whole Exodus narrative, but he becomes Gadol, and he is brought, apparently he's not with her, and he's brought to the daughter of Pharaoh. Vayila Levin becomes for her a son, and she calls him Moshe.
Well, he's not with her because he's with the mother and the sister.
Right.
Because he's being nursed.
He's being nursed.
Right.
He's being nursed.
Until he grows up, whatever that means.
Right, whatever. Yeah, Vaidal, maybe 3 years old.
Is he 5? Is he 3?
Like, we don't know, right? But certainly, he grows up twice. He has it growing up in before he comes to Pharaoh's daughter, and then he grows up again when he's with Pharaoh's daughter, as you'll see in verse 11. But she gives him the name Mina Mayim Mishisiu. I have drawn him. Mishi Tihu is like not really clear where that comes from, but like to mashach, or like to bring him forth. He was drawn from the water. And then it was after many days, the Vaidal Moshe Vayetzei Lachav. This is one of my favorite verse in the Torah, verse 11. Moshe grows up. He goes out to his brothers, leaves privilege. The first Yitziat Mitzrayim, the first exodus from Egypt, is the exodus from Pharaoh's home. Vayar b'sivlotam, vayar ish mitzri makeh ish ivrit me'echav, and he sees their suffering, like maybe his own suffering was seen by his adopted mother, and he sees twice. He sees an ish mitzri, Egyptian man, hitting a Hebrew man, and the text tells us from his brethren, from his kin. So there's a lot going on in verse 11, but we're going to go back to Moses and especially to Miriam, I guess, in the next text.
Right, exactly. So now we're in our Parsha, which is Bishalach, and we're on the other side of the sea, right? Or it's still in the sea itself. We're not quite on the other side. So we're in the sea, and it's so beautiful that the Israelites find their voice in song simultaneous with freedom, right? They leaving Egypt and they find their voices, right? So Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Israel et hashira hazot l'Adonai vayomru lemor. Then Moses and the Israelites sang the song to the Lord. They said, Ashiru l'Adonai ki ga'o ga'a sus v'rachvo ramah vayam. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. So note, first of all, it's so beautiful and moving to me that they find their voices in song. And the verse starts off with Moses and the Israelites saying the song to the Lord, but the next piece of it, Ashira Ladonai, is in the singular. So either Moses is disconnected from the community, or Moses is so connected that he's able to, or they are all singing with one voice, so that's why it's in the singular, right? I think we can go in either direction on this. And we point it out because it's very different than what Miriam does, which is at the end of the song. Vatikach Miriam Hanavi'ah. So suddenly, first of all, she has a name, right? The sister of Moses has a name, but she's being referred to how? Achot Aharon. And she's also being described as a prophet. Amazing. Why she isn't being described as Moshe's sister? Like the Midrash gets very interested in that. So she takes et hatof biyada. So she takes the timbrel in her hand, the teitzena kol hanashim achareha. And all the women go after her, betupim ubim mecholot, in dance and with timbrels, So she has it looks like this remarkable ability to like call community together. Vatan lahem Miriam, and Miriam responds to them, right? So again, it's very different than what Moshe does, even if we put what Moshe does in the best light, which I'm happy to do. Shiru l'Adonai. So she says to them, sing, but it's in the plural, to God, ki ga'o ga'a sus v'rochvo rama bayam. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and driver he is hurled into the sea. So it's the same words, right? It's the same words, but it's hers is in the frame of response and in the plural, and Moshe's was in the singular.
And what's remarkable, like in terms of where we're going this morning and where I went a bit last night, is that if we look at verse 20, everybody, if you look at verse 20, where we reintroduced to Miriam but this time, right, with a name, Miriam, and then with the powerful title of being a prophetess, and then the strange framing of her being the sister of Aaron, immediately after Moses had been in the center of the story, Moshe's song, and then Miriam, it could have said, and Miriam, who is a prophetess, arose, Moshe's sister, or Moshe and Aaron's sister. I mean, could have made sense, but with all three of these pieces, the name introduction of Miriam, her title as a prophet, a prophetess, and then the omission of Moshe's name is quite curious, because immediately in the very next verse in the Torah, and this is significant in terms of our reading, and this is really, it caught us so profoundly yesterday and where we want to take off, is that in the immediate aftermath of the Israelites coming through the Sea of Reeds, in the immediate aftermath of being saved from the waters, the raging waters of the Sea of Reeds, which of course we were talking it was like totally post-traumatic, stress disorder, post-traumatic water disorder, because the very beginning of the Exodus narrative begins with a trauma around water, right? All the Israelite children are being drowned in the sea, in the Nile, and Moshe is drawn from that trauma. And then of course, the first plague is around water, becomes blood. Here, in the very next moment after Miriam's reintroduction and Miriam's gallantry and Miriam's ability to galvanize people, right? And she, all the things about Miriam, she's a prophetess, she's reintroduced, and her name appears for the first time as Miriam in these letters. And remember, everybody, the Torah does not have any vowels in the way that we read it, right? We immediately encounter the Israelites' first, complaining, or the first, their moment of not having gone through water, but needing water, right? And so it's like an immediate juxtaposition.
They come through water and they don't have water.
They come through water and they don't have water, right? They're saved from water, but they can't do without water. And Vayasa Moshe et Yisrael Yam Suf, verse 22, and Moshe now takes the center stage again, and he brings them through, right? The Yam Suf, from the Sea of Reeds, and they Yetzu El Midbar Shur, they go out, they exodus, they leave to a wilderness called Shur, S-H-U-R. Vayelchu Shloshet Yamim Bamidbar, and they go 3 days in the desert, the wilderness, and Velo Matzu Mayim, and they did not find water.
So we have a lot of alliteration here, right? Miyam, Yamim, Mayim.
Mayim, Yam, exactly. And then they come, and this is the verse that really hit us, and I spoke about it last night in my sermon. And Vayavo Marata, they come to a place called Mara, right? And it's named, right? In the way Zara is doing this, the naming of the place is Mara. They come to a place called Mara, but Lo Yachlu Lishtod Mayim, and they can't drink water. There is water, but they can't drink it. They can't drink the waters of Mara, Ki Marim Mehem, for they are bitter.
So who's the they? So when I was studying with Sharon this morning, Sharon Conanisville, I don't know if she's here. I think I got to send her a link, unfortunately, but she said, some people say, and we have a text below that will say this, that the Marim refers to the people as opposed to the waters. It could be either one because they're both plural.
Right, so the plural, so here in this text, we have just two things before we're going to open up. We see a lot of activity in the chart in the chat, but just to hear this in an oral AURAL culture where this is not being seen, even as you see it, you can also note it as I've highlighted. But if you can hear this, like the alliteration is Vayavo Marata Velo Yachlu Lishtod Mayim, Miriam, Mayim, Marata, Mimara, Ki Marim Heim, Malkein Karashma Mara. It's a very incantational quality that highlights and focuses the listener on these words and these sounds. And especially, as Rabbi Koloresis is pointing out, the pronoun confusion here, or the object confusion, I should say, and pronoun confusion. Marim Haim, they were bitter. The simplest meaning, of course, is they couldn't drink the waters. Waters are always plural. Mayim, it's plural. But Mayim Mimara Ki Marim Haim is the Mayim is the Haim. Mayim is plural, waters. The waters are bitter. Marim Haim. Haim is them. They are bitter, are the waters. But of course, as you pointed out, it could be but it could also read the other plural, which is the people who came. And then it says in the end of the verse, verse 23, Al Kain Karashma, and therefore they called her name, its name, the name Mara.
So is it the name of the place or is it Miriam's name?
We don't know.
Right? Is Miriam named for bitter waters? And this is explaining her name? We don't know. Right? It's very mysterious and interesting. And there are other places in the Torah where there's this incantational quality around bitterness and water that if we have time, we'll show it to you later.
Right. So Bob has written, Moses already thinking, is this the pillar of smoke going to move? We need to ready. Miriam is in the moment. She knows we need time for dance and timbrels because there's so much amazement among the people. So Bob caught up on now they're already moving. Like, Moshe's like, hurry up.
Right. Okay. That's I love that.
Maybe Miriam is associated with Aaron here because of the connection to voice. Aaron is a voice for Moshe, and in this way, the prophecy. And Miriam is a voice of the prophet of prophecy, singing through the reed sea. Let me say this again. Aaron is the voice for Moshe, and in this way, prophecy in Miriam is the voice of prophecy, singing through the reed sea. So she is the voice of prophecy.
Three leaders with three very different skill sets. Absolutely.
Margot is like murmuring, sounds like Hebrew English for Mariam, murmuring. Right. So Bob is continuing the thread of Moshe's decision to move out camp. All this dancing, all the singing, people will be thirsty, have to figure out where do people drink. So it gives a little dan zchut for Moshe. They worked up a good thirst in their dancing. So better hurry up.
Nice.
But let's go a little bit further in this text and we'll open it up. Or if you want, we can look at the text or we can.
Yeah. Let's go through the rest of this text.
The text. Okay. Vayilono ha'am al Moshe lemor ma nishta, and the people complained to Moshe saying, what are we going to drink? So vayitzak al Adonai. And so it doesn't say who cries to God, but there's a cry to God. It seems that it's in the singular, so it's Moshe. Vayoreu Adonai eitz, and God shows him a tree. The word vayoreu here can mean shows him, or it could also mean he taught him, because the word vayorei here is like the word Torah, right? It doesn't have an aleph that would be visual. It's more that he instructed him about this tree. Some say it's the tree of life, some right, alluding to the original eitz in the Eitz HaChaim in the Torah, but he throws it into the water, and the waters become sweetened. Shama sama lo chok umishpat v'sham nisahu.
So it doesn't. I'm sorry. Did you translate?
No. It's just and in that place, another alliteration, another incantation. Sham sam lo chok umishpat v'sham nisahu.
Right.
There they were given law and statutes, and from that place they traveled, which is weird because they actually don't begin to travel for another 3 verses, but this becomes the rabbinic tradition that in that place they learned Torah, specifically the laws of judgment and courts, Shabbat, and also Kibbud Av V'Em, love, honoring your father and mother. But like this whole weird verse 25, that the solution to bitter waters was throwing a bitter piece of bark or some tree or something like that to alkalize or make the waters drinkable, is a very interesting. I played on it last night a little bit, but.
So you're assuming, I mean, that's one interpretation.
Right.
But the eitz is not necessarily bitter.
Not necessarily, no.
And also it doesn't say who threw it into the water.
Doesn't.
Right? The whole thing is really mysterious.
So just to finish this piece so we can move on to something, like we really wanted to focus on the bitter place, but then Moshe kind of says, we're in verse 26, right? This becomes a moment for Moshe to tell the people, if you are obedient to what God, God's voice, and if you do what is straight in God's eyes and listen to God's mitzvot, the commandments, which of course have not yet been given, which is, this whole piece is anachronistic because they haven't even arrived at Sinai to get mitzvot and to be shamarta chokukav and also to observe all the commandments. But then this last piece is powerful. Kol hamachala asher stamti mitzrayim lo asim alecha ki ani Adonai rofecha. All of the disease, the illness that I placed in Egypt, I will not place on you, for I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your doctor, your physician, your healer. So there's a healing moment here related to all of the pain that they brought with them from Egypt, and a warning that if they are not obedient, then, right, is this connected to their bitterness? Is that the bitterness what will be healed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm seeing something else here, which is interesting, which is, there's already this emphasis on listening to God's voice. And like you said, we're not at Sinai yet, but maybe it's not anachronistic. Maybe the whole Egypt story until now is listening to God's voice. Maybe like the chukim don't only come through the specific mitzvot as we narrowly construe them.
Yeah.
Right, so it's like bigger than that. Like, here's the time to
a
start
way of life.
A way of life. Like, start listening. See what I did to the Egyptians. See that you got out of Egypt. See that you passed through the Red Sea. It's really deep teaching.
Very deep.
It's not just Sinai, right? Like, the deep teaching has started.
Yeah, and it begins in a remarkable way as the first thing they learn after being liberated.
Yes.
Right. Here they are. They're free, and now they realize that, there is life after slavery, but it's not necessarily automatically that they're free. And here they are. There are things that they want for. There are things that they need. There are bitter waters. Not everything will be provided for them immediately. And then there's this whole ritual, which again, as Miriam Rubin pointed out, this could have been like it's a very shamanistic. It's kind of funny that the word sham appears, and I'm saying shamanistic, but sham, but like there's a shamanism of this tree ceremony that I looked it up quite a bit. Actually, there are many properties in different trees that can sweeten waters. There's a whole thing really? Here. Yeah. Wow. But like on a more allegorical place, which is what you're saying, like the roots of suffering and the roots of bitterness are somehow contramanded by listening to the deep structure of reality. Yeah. Like God is reality, whatever way you want to call it.
The deep structure of reality, what God has already done in liberating them from Egypt.
Right. That's right. If you can hear that and be reminded of that, then you can be freer.
Yeah.
Right.
And sweeter.
So
maybe let's just look at the Hasidic piece and then open it up.
Sure. Okay. Just before we go there, last thing, just for those of you who are going to study this on your own, if you can make sense of this, we'll love to hear from you on verse 27, where essentially the end of this piece of Torah ends with them leaving and arriving at a place where there are 12 well springs and 70 date palm trees, and they camp by the waters.
It's such a beautiful image. So they've left the bitter place.
And God is there. Ani Adonai Rafecha. I am God, your healer. This is ER, Aleph Yud Yud, Aleph Yud Resh, ER. Okay, let's go here. This beautiful text that Rabbi Kolas has found. Why don't you share this with us? Sharon
Kolas shared with me this morning. It's from a book. Go down a little bit. Let's see if the book, yeah, it's from, I put this in, but it didn't stick for some reason, by Art Green, Ariel Mays, Evan Leader, and or Rose. Sort of a collection of
speaking at the Maggid's table, speaking Torah.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So I heard it taught in the name of the Maggid that they were bitter refers to Israel. So, so what's the Hebrew again? Kimarimhem refers to Israel, for they were embittered at that time. So they were already embittered, like they were embittered in Egypt. The sick person calls sweet things bitter because of the bitterness in their own mouth. But by the power of Moses, who was already attached to Torah, the tree of life to those who hold fast to it. So that's really interesting, this idea of Moshe already attached to Torah, which actually connects to the more expansive notion of Torah that we were just talking about. The divine presence shone through him to give them the spiritual power to sweeten their mouths with the sweetness of Torah. This is, God showed him a tree, the tree meaning being Torah, which he cast into the waters and they were sweet. Wow, so what an amazing idea that the gift of Judaism is to give us Torah, which actually sweetens the waters or sweetens life. What a beautiful idea.
It's a beautiful idea. It's a very beautiful idea. And I'm curious to hear what people say about this, because I think that's what our departure for this conversation with you all, when we open this up, is that we really focused a lot on Miriam's bitterness, but here we've expanded it to include the bitterness of the people. And most powerfully here that in some way the waters here are kind of the waters that have become embittered by the people's bitterness. In other words, like that when there's a famous phrase in the Talmud called a posel b'mumo posel, that when you see something, when you come to disqualify the world, it's usually your own disqualification that you're seeing. You're kind of projecting it outwardly. Like your own bitterness is being expressed. And so this is the early rabbinic, truth is now being discussed in the context of they came out of Egypt, they're bitter, and Moshe's Torah sweetens it as it were for them. I'm curious about Miriam, coming back to Miriam for a second. Like, if Miriam is bitter, like, what is her bitterness? I talked about it last night. We talked about it. Our friend Stephanie Ives wrote a good little piece about it. Like, if Miriam is the object of this wordplay, is her bitterness, is it there's legitimate bitterness? Does she have legitimate bitterness? Is she eventually becomes the one who quenches the thirst of all the people of Israel with her not bitter water? So what's her alchemy? I'm so curious.
Yeah, so we see that she's very responsive to the community. So it says ki marim heim. Maybe she embodies the bitterness of the community as if to hold it for them.
Yes. Maybe what do you want to do?
We can open up.
Yeah.
I think we said a lot.
Okay, we said a lot. There's a lot here. It's now about 9:20. So great. Let's look into the chat. There's some beautiful things in the chat as well as the group here. We're going to start taking hands. We invite people to speak, but if you could also just be mindful that there are others also who would like to speak. So just keeping that in mind. Jay, go ahead. You're live and on the air with Open Book with Rabbi Skleres. Morning, Geshavas, Jay.
Good Shabbat Shalom. Comment you've inspired, and a question. On the last point, isn't it interesting that listening to God's voice is reminded just when they found their voice? And not only did they find their voice, but then possibly abused it in complaining bitterly. So the whole notion of finding your voice and listening to other voices is interesting. But also my question, thank you for going back to the beginning. That's always so instructive with, Miriam being named relative to Moshe, Achoto, and the whole water thing. But my question is on Vatetatsev. That's not just standing. I mean, we have echoes of that much later, possibly in terms of witnessing and things much bigger than just standing. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
I mean, my only comment is that it relates to Nitzavim and the whole people standing in Dvarim and Deuteronomy to receive Torah. So she's standing there to receive some kind of Torah or some kind of prophecy, and she waits. Again, I love that she doesn't walk in with the knowledge. Like we all, so many of us know so much when we come into a situation, we know, as opposed to observing the situation and letting the revelation of the situation come to us. And I think that's her teaching. So it's like standing to listen. Do you want to say anything about that?
That was beautiful.
Actually, I learned this from Rabbi Sharon, who talked about standing still can actually have in it often a lot of motion. Like it's the dynamism of receptivity. It's kind of a paradox.
Yeah.
What
does it mean to really witness?
What did you say, Jay?
What does it mean to really witness and receive? The whole notion of receptivity, just not standing there. Standing is a passive act. So They don't use that word. They use a different word.
Yes, I think that's really significant.
Yeah, and I think that the Midrash plays on this, and I don't think it's not my thing, but I think that according to the Midrash, it was Miriam who was the ultimate, her prophecies related to her vision that her younger brother would be the Redeemer of Israel. And according to the Midrash, she's the catalyst for her father to connect with her mother, to be with her mother during a time when there was when nobody was having sex because they were afraid that the children born would be killed. And so the Midrash says that she was the one that catalyzed her parents to get back together because she had had a vision that Moshe would redeem the Jewish people. So there is a sense that her standing there is standing firm in what she already knew, right? She's standing there not passively powerless, but like watching unfold the certainty of her own, like it was almost like you can imagine, like the simple reading of the text is Lidaya Maya Solo. She's like wondering what will happen. But the term Lidaya, like she knew what was going to happen. She was watching it happen exactly as it had happened in her dream and in her vision.
Interesting.
And she stood firm, right? It was her own, unyielding and she didn't relinquish the certainty of what she knew was about to take place with her brother. And that I think is also back to the Torah. Like she had received it and she stood firm in that knowing.
Right. So the difference in our readings is about time. Did she already have the knowledge or is she waiting to receive the knowledge?
Right.
Yeah. And Jay's writing it down.
But it could be very much like what you said about Moshe today, is that in the teaching from the Panim Yafod is that Moshe was already connected to Torah, even if it had not been received.
Yeah.
So they're not, it's not two things. Like he already had Torah, she had Torah in her, she had received it, but she was watching it unfold.
That's beautiful.
And she didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but she knew that it was happening.
So the Torah in you then enables you to see the thing that needs to be seen.
To recognize it.
To recognize
it. To remember it.
Yeah.
Right, to remember it. So I love that. So thank you, Brother Jay. All right, Sister Jill, go ahead.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. I just wanted to share when Reb Dave talked about water and how water in this parsha is, or in the whole scheme of things is either something that can be dangerous or it can be, just a life force and necessary, or bitter or made sweet. So I'll try to be short. I had what I guess I call it a dream, but it really felt like a direct experience with Hashem where I felt it happened at night and I felt like there was water that was coming, like I felt like my bed was coming up and there was water that was coming all through the apartment. And initially I felt completely overwhelmed and felt like I might drown. And then I realized that the bed was coming up and that it was holding me and the water was right below me and I was safe and I was actually completely encompassed but supported by the water. So, then I had a rabbi interpret the dream and basically, water represents Hashem. And even though it can be overwhelming, I believe when we add, Torah, community, it becomes what it's meant to be, is something to sustain us.
Beautiful. That's an amazing vision, like the difference between life being overwhelming and drowning in it and just being able to float and like go with the flow, literally. Like how do we respond to water?
It's not very metaphorical, obviously, like in a dream, but we can even talk about how, obviously there's so much going on in nature now and so on. There's so many levels of this, drinking water and levels at which our own, unskillful relationship with nature has now endangered us and endangered so many, especially people who, who live on the coastline. There's so much in this, but like it's powerful to have a dream that can be interpreted in a way and seen in a way that then becomes very supportive, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's clearly what in some way what the Torah here is going to talk about water all the time. Rabbi Koressis and I were talking about how Exodus, the narrative of Exodus, and the entire book of Exodus is full of water, like water everywhere. the people that complain about water, Moshe doesn't get into Israel because of water. It's, even the food that they receive is rained down. The word for raining, mamtir, is used when the man comes down from heaven. Like there's, like everything is about rain and water in this tradition. And Torah is compared to water. God is compared to water. So maybe that rabbi gave a good interpretation. May it be fulfilled in a good way. So Margot has her hand up. Go ahead, Mariam.
We have two Miriams up
Right,
there.
Miriam, medicine woman, medicine people. Go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jill, for that image of being overwhelmed. So I love the piece about from Yamim Yafot about the people being bitter and Torah the cure. But how about this? Miriam's Torah rather than Moses' Torah is the healing, is the cure. I think it's kind of ironic that her name is Maryam, bitter waters, because it's her that was redemption at the water twice. Redemption for Moses, pulling him out of the water, and Redeemer at the sea, and singing that sweet song. And I think that Mariam Bitter Waters is kind of ironic, or maybe meant to be the opposite than what it's supposed to be. And in Hasidic Masters this week, you taught that it was that by rearranging letters and changing perspectives, it can change the whole reality, like changing Rav to Erev. Perspective from Torah, perspective from God, perspective from Miriam, who changed anxiety into song, that can change the reality and change the bitterness of the people. And I love that part about Torah, and that being Eitz Chaim from Proverbs, and the eights that sweeten the waters. And with Tu B'Shvat coming from Pirkei Avot, we're like a tree planted by the water. We can't be uprooted by life's storms. Just so many connections. So I'm going to stop talking now and thank you.
Okay,
Oh, got it. Okay.
that was beautiful. And I was thinking as you were speaking, Mariam, that obviously there's a lot going on in the chat that I'm also reading simultaneously. And the Torah of Miriam, there's our friend Stephanie Ives, who's the head of school here at Beit Rabban, which shares our space. This is a space share here at Romemu for the last 2 years, wrote a beautiful Dvar Torah where she quoted a friend of hers, this Dr. Yardena, who wrote a whole piece about Torah Miriam. And what's funny here is that people so that, let me say that. So like, yes, maybe it was Torah Miriam that was the waters, right? But what's interesting here is that the bitterness of Miriam has not, like in reading the chats, nobody seems to be saying that it's okay for Miriam to be bitter. Like, and that bitter is a kind of natural response to being overwhelmed by suffering, and that she had a dose of suffering that her you did, it's true, you did say that Miriam like legitimately could be bitter, because in many ways, when we start thinking about Miriam's bitterness, we start thinking she wasn't named. She, her brother, she safely imagines her brother as becoming she does what she realizes her brother
goes to the king's palace,
goes to the king's
she
palace.
stays in slavery.
Right,
Right.
Which is okay. Like we also think like she has different roles. She was she might have been one of the midwives, right? And she was a powerful, antidote. She was working with the people. She was in birth, everything that is born has to be in, like someone said, in amniotic fluid. There's bitterness. There's the waters of bitterness are what are vivifying. They're alive, but she's living in them, right? And her bitterness, right, is like maybe the people can't drink the waters of bitterness because the people don't know how to receive the Torah of Miriam, like how to be inspired by that bitterness, how to sing in spite of that bitterness, right? Like that's her Torah. It's like she can lift it up, and and we don't want someone to lead from bitterness, true. And Miriam doesn't. She leads with song, right? She
No,
leads
there's
with,
a moment where she's bitter.
and there is a moment where she's bitter. That's true
Right?
too.
So
Later,
So maybe like I think what I heard you saying is that we're resistant to thinking of her as a bitter leader, but maybe she is, and maybe that's part of her, right? And it comes out in numbers when she's complaining about her brother.
right? That could be, and it could also be that when God tells Moses to throw the stick into the water, and the way that the Midrash says that the stick is bitter itself, which is one way of looking at it. You said, well, maybe it's a sweet tree. That's true, but in the Midrash, the tree is bitter. Maybe Miriam's bitterness and the water's bitterness, the people can't drink the waters that are bitter, means that they don't know how to metabolize like the powerful healing message that comes from Miriam's honesty and her being her ability to sing in spite of her bitterness, right? And through it, actually, not just in spite, but like to use it, as I said last night with Dr. King, he said he turned his bitterness into a creative force.
It's amazing.
And maybe like that's the lesson. Like we keep thinking that it was Moses who throws it in, but we don't know who throws it in.
We just know it's in the masculine.
We just know it's in the masculine. But
it's singular masculine.
Right.
But maybe that's covering something up. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? We're seeing a lot of activity. So let's I don't know if Nechemia's hand up means he wants us not to call on him or call on him. So I'm going to call on Nechemia. Okay, Nechemia.
You should be able to unmute yourself, Nechemia.
You're unmuted. I don't know why
we don't hear him. We don't hear you.
Nechemia, I can work with you. I think it's a tech issue on your end, so I'll chat you.
All right, so then move
We'll
to
come back to
Marilyn,
him.
yeah. Marilyn.
Mute. Perfect. Hi.
Hi.
Shabbos, everybody. Oh, that's great, because God must have helped me here, because I wanted to go after what you said, Rabbi David, because I wanted to go right back to the beginning where the lives of the Hebrews were embittered, and they called out to God, and God hears them. And there's this whole relationship with Miriam that has to do with voice and with bitterness and with changing bitter to sweet. So changing that, and who has agency. So I also was sort of following on what you were saying, Rabbi David, because I heard this expression connected with the Seder, actually, that you should take your bitterness and it should come out of your mouth. You should let it rise up out of you. You shouldn't keep it in, or that's depression. You should let it come out, just like the bitter herbs, rises up in your nose, etc. So I was definitely going for, Miriam uses her voice all the time. I mean, she uses it to birth the babies, Puah, and she uses it to speak to Batya, and she uses it to sing, and she takes that bitterness and she uses it, but the connection that I want to go back to is God, because God says, I am your healer. And I actually did a little song on it, and it was sort of interesting, because where I went is, it's God speaking and saying, I am the one that changes bitter to sweet, so that we as humans can raise our voice, but we also have to remember that God is the one that changes bitter to sweet, and that it's possible that it doesn't have to stay bitter. We can raise our voices and it can change to sweet. Anyways, that's my little...
That relates to the midrash that you brought up yesterday about God addressing bitter with bitter as opposed to with sweet, like human beings.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marilyn. We're going to go to Daniel and hopefully Miriam, because we're talking about Miriam. So Daniel, go ahead.
Good Shabbos.
Yes,
Marilyn, you said most of what I was about to say. Thank you. That line, the line of the divine voice saying, "I am your healer." I'm pretty sure it's the only time in Torah that Yud-He Vav-He speaks in that way. And maybe the psycho-spiritual mystery here is that Mara is a psycho-spiritual location. It really is the post-traumatic stress of what of the people that absorbed in Mitzrayim. And maybe Miriam becomes kind of the role model for healing the bitterness by facing the bitterness, that the divine, the healer, is where the bitterness is. We have to look at Mara. We have to face the Mara. And facing it allows us to go from, I think the divine says that the divine made for them a test, which is the word
Nisahu.
Nisahu. And if we play with that word, it's also the word for nes, for miracle, that the place of the test, the place of the miracle, the place of transformation is in the embitteredness. And I really loved what you were saying earlier, Diane, about this great line that the divine gives, which if you read it in Hebrew, im shamoa tishmu, lakol yud-he vav-he Elohecha v'ha-yashar, is this doubling of the listening. It's a doubling. Shamoa tishmu. It's a kind of like, if you listen to the embitteredness, you will also listen that right there is the voice of the divine. It's almost like a warm-up for Sinai, that the divine voice is within us. That is like the most radical Jewish teaching that there is. That's the Yashar moment.
It's also echoed in, Jay and I were talking about this before, in the Parsha of Nitzavim, that it's in our mouth. We hear it and speak it in the most intimate way. It's like right there for us. It's not up there. It's not, it's not, we don't need someone to go over the seas or to go to the heavens to get it for us.
Right, the voice of the divine is within us. That seems to be where the healing for the embitteredness is. So I know I spoke too much there, but that's okay.
Thank you, Daniel. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Daniel. I love that you healed yourself. You said that I spoke too much, but that's okay. That's a moment of self-healing. I appreciated that.
I love that.
I love that too. Everybody in the chat is talking about the pentatonic scale. Like that great is one of the great videos I ever watched. Most movie videos was a preacher talking about the Song of the Slaves. That was the song behind Amazing Grace, right? That he took this nigun, this melody, and he sang it out, and it was like they're singing their bitterness, and it became this song it later became a song of a radical ocularity, a radical change in seeing and vision. We have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to get to Miriam, of course, and then we'll try our hand at getting back to Nehemiah. We know Nehemiah, we know. But go ahead, Miriam. Boker Tov.
Okay, or so good to spontaneously decide to arrive at the teachings of Miriam. And I just want to thank you so much for what you're bringing through. And I'm hearing this text in a completely new way this morning with the learning that everyone's doing together. And I just want to observe that the Israelite people have just gone through a tremendous consciousness shift. Like the mechanics that the sea has opened and their bodies are through on the other side, but their minds are still in Egypt. And so one of the first things that Miriam, her medicine, is doing is saying, no, like, yeah, Moses is singing. He brought you out, but you sing now, Shiru. So open up your mouths and begin to integrate this new consciousness and find your own voice that is alive in you. Find, as Daniel just pointed out, find that divine is within you and then sing out to God, sing out God, sing God today with us together. And then there's like confusion. They're like, no, I don't know what you're saying. So she's like, okay, you know, what I see is like, this was a 3-day medicine ceremony on some level with a tree root, a bitter tree that helped them understand that the tree of life, the essence of the tree of life. By ingesting the tree of life, they then got to understand the laws. Okay, know that I am God, your healer, and be in relationship with me, and I will free you. I will free your consciousness. You will be able to serve me. You will be able to know that you are divinity. You will be able to sing. And so this integration that's happening, like I see Miriam, she's called Mara because there's a connection, a cellular, she's like helping to assist the transformation now on a mind and cellular way. It's like, okay, people, let's get into alignment here. We're not in alignment. And so, and then from that place, the springs emerge. The consciousness shifts. There's 70, now there's not one tree, but 70 trees. So there is this shift of consciousness that she helps to bring with the bitter medicine that she's carrying, and perhaps and the song and the consciousness that she's aware of in that space.
Beautiful, so beautiful. And it's amazing that you have the trees that were thrown in the water right behind you. Right?
Right there, here they are.